Did you notice that this show doesn't have any commercials? I'm not selling you diapers or vitamins or smoothies or gasoline. That's because I don't want corporate sponsors telling us what to investigate and what to say. Instead, you're our sponsors. This is a production by our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. If you want more investigations, more hard-hitting news, if you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in this crazy world, it's time to step out onto the high wire. Are you one of those people that woke up this morning, your radio alarm went off, and you heard Sonny and Cher singing, "I got you, babe, I got you"? Of course, I'm making reference to that famous movie with Bill Murray back in 1993 called Groundhog Day. I had a friend of mine talk about that yesterday. She said, I feel like every morning I wake up, it's just like this dream and it won't go away and it starts all over again and it just seems to be the same day over and over and over again. I thought, that is the best way to describe how I feel. It's not terrible, it's not great, it's just this day that won't end and it just keeps coming back around. And then when you wake up in the morning, here we are again and it hasn't changed. You start asking yourself, what has to happen today? What is going to happen to end this repetitive Groundhog Day? Does Punxsutawney Phil have to see his shadow? What is going on? I think that's what we're all dealing with. And today, we are going to try and announce what we believe should be the last piece of information, what we need to know to finally end this reoccurring nightmare. I think this is all really put together very well in one video that came out this week. I want you to watch this video. There's what was obvious when we watched it, but to me, it encapsulates many of the issues we've been dealing with throughout the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look at what the microphones captured in the White House press room this week.
You can take out the mask, Doug. The case fatality rate's like 0.1 to 0.3 according to USC.
Is it really? That's reassuring.
USC.
Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway.
USC and LA County Public Health have come up with a study. They found that there are 7,000 cases in California, but they really believe that there are anywhere from 221,000 to 442,000 people who were infected.
Really?
Yeah.
So that makes it 0.1 to 0.3? There's a study to come out with today?
Yeah, just came up today. So it suggests that the case fatality rate is about 10. It seems to be.
Wow.
Which puts you right in line with the flu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what it is.
So it was a hoax.
I don't think it was a hoax.
That was Fox's John Roberts bringing the information about the fact that it looks like the rate of death in America is something like the flu. There's a lot to get out of this conversation, and I'm going to dig into all of it today. But first, let's go over what happened this week in America. In order to do that, I want to bring in our own Jeffrey Jackson, who's been watching the news closely. Jeffrey, what happened in the last 7 days of the COVID-19 continued lockdown?
Well, Del, we normally go over numbers of cases, but I think it's important today to start out with the new jobless claims. So it's 4.4 million as of this past week that was reported. That brings the 5-week total to more than 26 million, wipes out all the gains since the Great Recession. However, the good news is it seems like this past week and this week, last week was the week of protests. We saw all the protests, were reported on those. This week seems to be the national conversation is really starting to go into overdrive about reopening, like what states are reopening. And Georgia started out front with that. So Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Ohio all announced this week that they will be easing their shutdown restrictions. Now, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp it was reassuring in that article that was just shown on the screen. He was saying that he sees a terrible impact on public health as well as the pocketbook if they stay shut down for longer. So he's starting a reopening period tomorrow, which is Friday, and then continuing it to Monday with more businesses. North Carolina is set to announce their plan to reopen today around 3 o'clock, so right around after the show here. And keep in mind, North Carolina is one of the first places we saw the protests. We saw a woman get arrested there. So it seems like we're going to start seeing a lot of states reopening. Now, the federal guidelines for that, put out by the White House and the CDC, require 14 days of a downward trend before you can start moving to these phases that the Georgia governor is going at. So President Trump came out and said he does not agree with the decision of Georgia Governor Kemp. However, he said, quote, "I told the governor very simply that I disagree with his decision, but he has to do what he thinks is right." So these federal guidelines are just guidelines. It's really up to the governors here in the states and the individual states' rights.
Wow. And I think that it really shows sort of that idea that, when people try to say that, Donald Trump, is trying to control, or any of those that thought that, he's trying to control the country through all of this, he keeps showing over and over again, for what it's worth and what everyone, wants to think politically, he is leaving it to the governors. He is letting this, and has from the beginning, saying the federal government is only here to make recommendations. The states are going to have to decide for themselves. So that's a very interesting development. And it's interesting to see him actually pushing back against someone that's trying to open, whereas you might think the pushback would be otherwise. So very, very interesting detail. Thank you. What else is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another data point in that direction is Attorney General William Barr, in a recent interview, said that the stay-at-home orders are, quote, "disturbingly close to house arrest." So this is a fascinating thing as the country looks towards reopening. So he was basically saying shutting down businesses and requiring people to stay at home are intrusions of civil liberties. So he said in the interview, basically, state governors can do certain things and use certain police powers to protect the public health. But when it starts interfering with state commerce, employment, things like that, that's when the federal government can step in. And also religion. That's what last week the Justice Department stepped in. There is a Mississippi church in Greenville, Mississippi, that was doing drive-in services, and they were ticketed by the police for doing that because they weren't following social distancing. So the church sued, and the Justice Department wrote a statement in support of that church for freedom of religion. So this is an interesting time in the United States happening right now, because there's so many pushing and pulling with federal guidelines, states guidelines, religious rights, states' rights.
And literally the Constitution of the United States is like in the middle of this tug of war right now. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
And yeah, well, as we were covering China, everyone was watching this when it was in China, the coronavirus outbreak. We saw these pictures of drones yelling at people through loudspeakers, and we thought, my God, this can never happen here. And then we saw some reports of, other countries. Italy was using drones, and Spain's using drones, and I was skeptical. I thought this isn't going to happen in the United States, but lo and behold, Connecticut is using drones.
Really? This
is a headline. They're using drones to enforce social distancing. So in this article, it says quote, "The drones include specialized sensor and computer vision systems that can display a person's temperature, heart and respiratory rates, as well as detect people sneezing or coughing in a crowd." They said the technology can accurately detect infections from 190 feet away. This is all part of the Flattening the Curve pilot program. And in Michigan, where some of the shutdown orders were, a lot of people called it aggressively authoritarian. It's kind of interesting because Michigan was actually accepting drones as donations from China.
No.
This is a fascinating headline, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
This gets back to a point I pointed out last week, right? I mean, we now have China. When we think about, what happened in 9/11 and the idea that Al-Qaeda was trying to rob us of our freedoms, that was the goal that had been stated throughout that time. We want America to be so afraid that they start taking away their own freedoms. You have to imagine this. There's been a battle, right, throughout time between communism and capitalism. And of course, we've always tried to infiltrate other nations that were communists and say there's a better way. You really should let your people be free. You really got to wonder, one of the, I think, arguably the greatest communist power left in the world is China. And now they're supplying us with surveillance equipment so that America and Michigan and states can start treating their own people like they do in China, with drones following us. It reminds us, I forget what the name of the film was. It's like a Tom Selleck film where Gene Simmons was the bad guy, and there was these robots everywhere. Like, I'm probably dating myself now, but it feels like that, right? We're going to have like these drones and equipment flying around, spying on us. I mean, at what point, you know, it's checking our temperature? Is it listening to what we're saying? I mean, this is really, really shocking. And I think, you know, whether or not, you know, just the fact that China is helping with the surveillance of Americans in America, I think shows you how far off course we are. China loves seeing this, and they love helping with us surveilling our own people. Really, really crazy story.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say than from what you just said. I just it's fascinating stuff. So let's move on. You know, there's a couple other headlines in the news here, a little more serious tone. I guess more serious than drones surveilling the population of America, but more of a health aspect. Heart attacks. Doctors in Los Angeles, in California, are wondering, where are all the heart attack and stroke patients? And we've talked about this, you know, off air. You've talked about this on air, but hospitals are seeing numbers plummeting of people that are usually coming in and out of these ERs with issues with the strokes, with heart attacks, with cardiac issues. So in this article, it says, quote, numbers have plummeted by a third to a half. New doctors and health officials are increasingly worried that steps taken to keep hospitals at the ready, along with a widespread public fear of the virus in emergency rooms, have left people who are in immediate need of life-saving help unwilling to seek treatment. One of the doctors, the ER doctors in here, called it corona collateral damage syndrome. And he said, we may never know, or we may not know for a while until the surveillance numbers come out, how much of this collateral damage is actually happening with people that need treatment and that can't do it. Another doctor in the article said, look, these cases don't just vaporize because of the virus. He worries that people are suffering at home and are afraid to go into the emergency rooms. And, you know, that's a narrative that was pushed by the CNNs and the New York Times out there, of these packed emergency rooms. Everyone should stay home, don't go out, don't come to the emergency rooms. And this is the real life collateral damage of it.
Amazing. You have to imagine, if these people aren't going to hospitals, they must be dying in their homes. What is the body count in the end going to be? Heart disease claims over 600,000 people every year in America, and that's when hospitals are available to them. What are these numbers going to be? Will we even see these numbers, right? I mean, we're going to be talking about things later. If you died in your home of a heart attack, are they going to just assume that's a coronavirus death? Those are some of the things coming up, you know, that we're going to be discussing. But clearly, and you think about it, no stents are being done. There's no organ transplants being done. None of the doctors, we've sent all the doctors in hospitals home all over this fear. The only thing working in America right now are the ERs, the ICUs. The rest of the hospitals are not functioning. All of the other reasons you die, which have always been so much higher than flu, you have to imagine these people have got nowhere to go, and they are, I would guess, going to end up dying at much higher numbers, something that mainstream media doesn't seem to want to talk about at all. It's incredible.
Yeah, and a story that correlates with that, New York basically is they're telling their ambulance workers, do not resuscitate. So this is a policy that went out to New York ambulance services, and they're telling their first responders that if they can't find a pulse, basically leave the person there and allow them to pass, or allow that to happen. And in the article, it says, quote, first responders were outraged over the move. They're not giving people a second chance to live anymore. Owen Bazarli, head of the city union, whose members include uniformed EMTs and paramedics, fumed of state officials. He said, quote, our job is to bring patients back to life. This guideline takes that away from us. That is shocking. This is
That
America
is
we're in right now.
so shocking. Unbelievable. I mean, to think that we are saying we have the ability to resuscitate you. That's what EMTs are there for, and they're being told, don't do it. All of these things, I think, are going to come into great question as we get into the details today of everything we now know about the coronavirus. That is really sad, and it's a terrible side effect of all of this. And I think it's going to really bring into question, in the end, how well New York handled this, Cuomo, de Blasio, all of these people that are going to have to speak to this and explain why you didn't save as many people as you could. We've talked about chloroquine, something that around the world is being shown success rates, and how difficult, Andrew Cuomo, made it to use. Not until the very last minute instead of early on, which seems to be how it's affecting. We talked about the problems with ventilators. We can get more into that a little bit today. But this just, I mean, this to me just seems like the icing on the cake. Are you're knowingly essentially killing people. You are taking away the modern, approach towards health. We know we can resuscitate you. How many people could have been saved? And instead, this is going to be stacked onto it. And again, is this all to bloat a COVID-19 death rate, or are the hospitals really that overrun? Because as far as I know, it sounds like, aren't all the hospitals around the world asking for a severance package because they've lost so much money? So few people have come in hospitals around the nation that they are about to go out of business. I mean, this story could not get crazier if you tried. And certainly, I think, of all of it, this idea we are not going to resuscitate just seems horrific and dark.
Right. And now, Stat News had an article about ventilators. Now, we talked about Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel last week, and really broke down he's kind of a whistleblower, and other doctors too, other ER doctors and respiratory therapists.
Right.
And now here we are. Stat News comes out and reports on an analysis by the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, basically confirming what Dr. Kyle Seidel said.
Wow.
In the article, it says, quote, the authors argue that physicians need a new playbook for when to use ventilators for COVID-19 patients, a message consistent with new treatment guidelines issued Tuesday by the National Institutes of Health, which advocates a phased approach to breathing support that would defer the use of ventilators if possible. So calling for this phased approach to basically hold off on those ventilators until you really need them because they're not working. Now, in this article also, it says that a lot of COVID-19 patients are being put on ventilators that don't need to be, and the features of the disease can make mechanical ventilation harmful to the lungs. I mean, this is exactly what we're hearing with the ER doctors on the ground.
And now you have the NIH, the National Institute of Health, the most powerful and well-funded body of medicine and science in the United States of America. Arguably, the world has put out new guidelines last week. I find this shocking since the video we put out discussing Kyle Seidel and talking about the lack of oxygen in the blood, which NIH is now admitting. They're now looking and seeing we definitely see a different trait. They're admitting in this article, right, that that acute respiratory distress syndrome isn't necessarily, being portrayed the way we know it, that the use of ventilators. And we have a video where we covered this a couple of weeks ago that has false information run across it. Well, I'll tell you what, Facebook, it's not false information now that the National Institute of Health is putting out new guidelines. They said this isn't true. They weren't leading with ventilators. They got oxygen anyway. Really? Then why did the National Institute of Health have to put out new guidelines saying, back off on the ventilators, you're killing people, we need to start introducing oxygen? All of this is what we're going to get to today. We are being censored when we're bringing the truth. The High Wire has really not missed a beat the entire time. Jeffrey, you've been a part of our team making sure that we have multiple sources to everything we've been talking about. Thank God for Dr. Kyle Seidel, who, did come forward and I think really started this momentum of research into are we treating this correctly? It's great to see that the National Institute of Health got involved and more, new, guidelines are coming out. It'd be really nice to see Facebook say, whoops, sorry for censoring the truth. That's something we're going to continue to push on, but that's my own beef. That's really not what's happening in national news. What else we got? Is there any light at the end of this? Anything this week that can, that we can, take some satisfaction in?
Yeah, we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think it was, Los Angeles had basically a snitch hotline, and the mayor of Los Angeles was saying, look, you'll get rewards if you snitch on your neighbors for
Right,
violating
crazy.
social distancing. So New York City Mayor de Blasio basically tried to do the same thing in his city, and he was met with, I believe the headline says, quote, social distancing tip line flooded with penis photos and Hitler memes. Here we go. So basically what happened is he told New Yorkers to snitch on each other for violating social distancing, and his tip line was flooded with, this is according to the article, extended middle fingers, videos of the mayor dropping the Staten Island groundhog, pictures of him going to the gym, other pictures which were described in the title, and so on and so forth. So it looks like that was kind of a big backfire on him.
I think so, and it's nice to see that in true New York fashion, where I met my wife in New York. I spent many, many years in New York. I'm fond of New York City. It's nice to know that no matter what happens there and through this coronavirus pandemic, you're not going to turn New Yorkers into Nazis. That's just not in their blood. Instead, you want a picture? How about this? I love it. Thank you for that information, a little bit of light to show that people are still alive and pumping, which I think is the big question we all have as we're, making our way through this repetitive Groundhog Day. As I described at the top, it's nice to know that there's still a sense of humor and an idea that maybe there's something inside of us that can get back to normal sometime soon. Jeffrey, thank you so much for that report.
Yeah, amen to that, Del.
All right, take care. We'll talk to you soon. All right, so I started the show out with, showing you John Roberts, talking, apparently unaware, at least we thought was unaware, that there were microphones open in the room by one of the news channels, and was talking to all of the people in there about the fact that there are new stats coming out, and that we don't need to wear the mask anymore, and it looks like it's a lot like the flu. This really, I think, shows you exactly what the news already knows, but you have to be asking yourself, but why is that not what they're saying on television still? Why didn't I hear about that? That happened when? A couple of days ago, and still that's not what's being announced on the news? Fox didn't come forward and say, hey, this is all over, we can take our masks off. Well, it's fascinating. It's something I want you to track more and more and more. The censorship, the danger to how these stories are being betrayed. We're going to get into the details of this story, but I really want you to be alarmed at what happened afterwards. Because after this little slip up or whatever it was took place, John Roberts ended up having to essentially make an apology. And I want you to know how this works because I've worked in television. I won an Emmy Award working on the Doctor's television show, so I know what happens behind the scenes. And I know what happens when you make a mistake as a producer or you put something out or a microphone gets out and now Fox is held responsible. You get sat down in a room, they all look at the video and say, you want to explain yourself here, Robert? And I mean, at first he's going to say, well, I mean, look, I didn't know there was a microphone on. That can't possibly be my fault. Yeah, but you're undermining. We are getting calls from Pfizer. We are getting calls from Sanofi Aventis. And all of our advertisers right now, we're in deep, and you better think of something to say. And so what does he say? Well, that ended up being the headline from this. Not that Fox, news reporter is ahead of the game and really reporting. What it was, oh, I was just kidding. Take a look at some of these headlines really quick. That ended up referencing, was Fox News' John Roberts caught on a hot mic discussing COVID-19 as a hoax? Next, new Fox News, John Roberts shoot down coronavirus conspiracy theorists. There is no vaccine. Basically, well, no, I was just joking. It goes on. Everyone's been vaccinated around here anyway. Conspiracy theories run rampant after White House hot mic catches, here it is, press room joke. Oh, he was joking. Oh, it's just a giant joke. Media takes it. White House hot mic catches NYT photog joking with Fox's John Roberts. We've all been vaccinated around here, talking about not addressing what his conversation was actually about. You did have the cameraman saying, well, we're all vaccinated here. It seems like he didn't even know what he was talking about. But the real issue was the numbers have come down. And here's the AP. Let's look how the AP treated this entire story. Video misrepresents journalist comments in White House briefing room. Oh, it was misrepresented. It was taken out of context. We edited the video. Is that what we're saying? That a hot mic really didn't happen or someone went in and manipulated it? Did we have voiceovers? Is that what happened? Let's see what the AP ends up saying about this story. It says, claim video caught comments between Fox News and New York Times journalists revealing they believe COVID-19 was a hoax. That's the claim. But we looked into it, and we say it's false. A video feed that was actively recording the White House briefing room captured an exchange between Fox News chief, White House correspondent John Roberts, and New York Times photographer Doug Mills saying COVID-19 was a hoax. And we've all been vaccinated, but the comments were taken out of context, Roberts told the Associated Press. The comments were made in jest. We were kidding. It was a big joke. It's not a big joke. The joke is on us. When you start catching people telling the truth and they try and say, oh, no, we were joking, you really have got to wonder, why is that the headline? Now, I want you to watch this video one more time as it starts out, and you tell me, did they all get together? It's like 3 different guys talking. Were they backstage and said, you know what'd be really funny? I know there's a hot mic going out there. Let's do a little ditty, okay? I'll come in and announce the USC numbers and the fact that it's down. You say, well, we're all vaccinated for it. And you, third guy, you say, well, does that mean it's like on par with the flu? Oh, all right, yeah, I can do that. When's my line? Oh, you'll be after, what are they, actors? We got a director back there, Martin Scorsese back there, setting up this little ruse for America? You ask yourself, does this sound like something that was preordained or as a joke? Or are these guys having a serious conversation about something that affects them on a daily basis, how close they can sit to each other, and whether or not they need the mask? Watch again and see if you're capable of getting a sense of whether this was a joke or not. Take a look.
You can take out the mask, Doug. The case fatality rate's like 0.1 to 0.3 according to USC.
Is it really? That's reassuring.
USC.
Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway.
USC and LA County Public Health come up with a study. They found that there are 7,000 cases in California, but they really believe that there are anywhere from 221,000 to 442,000 people who were infected.
Really?
Yeah.
So that makes it 0.1 to 0.3? Does a study to come out later?
Yeah, just give it to them. So it suggests that the case fatality rate is about 10. It seems.
Wow.
Which puts you right in line with the flu.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, that's what it is.
So it was a hoax.
I don't think it was a hoax.
Come on, folks. That was an honest conversation. And in fact, if it was a joke, he would have said, yeah, it's a hoax. He didn't. John Roberts said, no, I don't think it was a hoax. He probably drifted off down the hallway saying, I think it's a colossal mistake. But I'm not necessarily saying that they just made this thing up. Either way, you've got to start watching the news very carefully. You've got to start recognizing what I've said from the beginning. Pharma funds your news. They pay all of these anchors. They pay all of these reporters. And if you get out of line, they will say, we are going to pull millions of dollars out of your news program if you don't fix this little slip up. We don't care if it was caught on an open mic or not. That's what's going on here. This is a cover-up. We have caught media in the middle of a cover-up, and you're watching John Roberts have to apologize for something he should never have to apologize for. And if this was a joke, and they were really just joking, then what happened later? Maybe he asked the actual question. Did he really not care about it? Did he think it was baloney? Well, he did ask the question. Listen to how seriously he asked this question, how well he puts it together, and what should have been the news is this answer by Deborah Birx. Take a look.
The University of Southern California and the LA County Public Health put out a report today that suggests that the penetrance of the virus is as much as almost 40 times what it was believed to be, that as many as 442,000 people in LA County may have been infected, which suggests two things. It suggests that you have a lot more people out there who could be spreading the virus, but it also suggests that the case fatality rate is more in line with the 2017-2018 flu than what we've seen in some other areas of the world. But I'm wondering if you've seen that, what your thoughts were.
So we're looking at all those studies very carefully, and I think you will remember over the last 3 weeks I've been talking about the level of asymptomatic spread and my concern about asymptomatic spread, because with flu and other diseases, when people are sick, it's easy to contact trace. When people are not sick and shedding virus, you have to have a very different approach. Younger age groups may have more asymptomatic disease, and your asymptomatic disease may decrease with your older age groups, and that your symptomatic disease might increase with age groups. This is still our working hypothesis. We have no data right now still to support that. And we're really asking people to start testing in among the first responders and the healthcare workers that may have had the greatest exposure, because that's where the test will be most reliable. And then when we have the luxury, we can go out to broader and broader communities. But this has been the fundamental question to begin with and has been persistent. And we will emphasize to the American people again, this is a highly contagious virus. And we don't know by looking at someone whether they have pre-existing conditions or not. And so all of us, as far as protecting others, must continue to do all of the recommendations to ensure that when we are in an asymptomatic state, we're not passing the virus to others.
She absolutely did not ask the question. In fact, completely diverted it and said this has been the essential question from the beginning. How many asymptomatic carriers? How can we get the testing done? Testing, testing, testing. How can we keep surveillance on you? Can we break this down for a second? The question was, we now have studies happening all over the country that show that the death rate of the coronavirus, because it looks like a much higher number of people are infected, between 220 to 440,000 people, then that brings down the death rate. If the death rate is like the flu, what do you have to say about that? Why are we locked down? She does not address the death rate at all. Instead, goes on to a giant tirade about asymptomatic carriers. So let me explain to you what's happening. This is something that I warned you was going to happen when we started covering this from the beginning and talking about what is the death rate percentage. That's what we need to know. And once we've gone below that and we realize this entire thing was a mistake, are you going to open this back up? See, she doesn't want to address that. She doesn't want to address the fact that the death rate's coming down because they still have a vaccine to sell you. They still want to bring in surveillance. They still want drones. They want to test you. This is an agenda, folks, and it's proven by her answer, because she could have easily said, we're looking into that data. And it's very interesting. It may mean we can open up since all this is a flu. Instead, she said, now listen to how she describes this. This has been our discussion. How many asymptomatic spreaders? How many asymptomatic? You're going to start hearing more and more about this. You see, they want to change the conversation. They're not going to admit to you we made the greatest mistake in world history by locking down a country and a world for no reason, nothing more than the common flu. They can't do it. They can't save face. Instead, they're going to make a bad guy here, something we still have to investigate: the asymptomatic carrier, the asymptomatic spreader. Let me explain to you exactly what that is. That is the incredibly healthy human beings in America. See, now we've got to track you. We're coming after you, all you healthy people that are so healthy, this virus does nothing to you. The 90-something% of you that have, or, whatever number is, 50%, 90%, all of the children are like this. All of those healthy little robust children running around America, we need to track them. We need to test them. We need to figure out which ones they are and why aren't they having any symptoms. We got to get on top of this. No, Deborah, we don't. We really don't. All we needed to know is the death rate worse than the flu, like a lot worse. Is it something like Spanish flu or Ebola? If so, keep us locked down. But if it's as low as a common flu season, then let us out of here. She doesn't want to talk about that. She wants to make the healthy people the bad guys. And what does she say? Yes, this has been our problem, right? So many asymptomatic people, so many asymptomatic carriers. I want to point out something. This is where they're starting to get hypocritical with their own talking points. See, when they talk about the flu vaccine, let's go back to everything you remember. Every time they advertise the flu vaccine, they say to you, well, yes, it's only 10% effective, meaning only 1 out of 10 of you is even going to stop the flu, which means it's a terrible product. But how do they always back it up? They say, but, the benefit of getting the flu shot is even if it doesn't actually stop the flu, it really makes your symptoms more mild, and that's why you should get it. Well, you can't get more mild a symptom than not having any at all. And that's what's happening to the natural health, all of the healthy people in America and around the world. They're having barely any symptoms at all. In fact, she says, as you're trying to compare it to the flu, I don't want to talk about the flu deaths and the fact that it's right on par there and there's no reason to be here. I want to talk about it's so much easier to track flu because people get really sick and we see their symptoms. So then what you're saying is that coronavirus is like one of the best viruses you can get. It has a really low death rate, and you almost have no symptoms at all. This isn't a problem, Deborah. This should have us dancing in the streets because most of us are going to either have a common cold or be asymptomatic, meaning our bodies were so capable of handling this, we didn't even feel it. Be very careful, America, that they are going to try and make those people the bad guys. Now, maybe they'd be bad guys if this asymptomatic carriers were infecting and killing 20% of the population like the Spanish flu, or even more like Ebola. But when the death rate is the same as the flu has always been, meaning people who are already deathly ill because of other comorbid issues, and that is all that is happening, only you just are experiencing it as a much less virulent experience as the flu. Be careful. I'm trying to warn you, America. They are spinning, man. They are trying to polish this turd as best as they can, but it is a turd. Let's get into it. Why is this a turd? Why are they dead wrong? Multiple studies now across the world. Let's talk about what John Roberts is saying. Here's the headline. All right, early antibody testing suggests COVID-19 infections in LA County greatly exceed documented cases. It goes on. USC and the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health on Monday released preliminary results from a collaborative scientific study that suggests infections from the new coronavirus are far more widespread and the fatality rate much lower in LA County than previously thought. Based on the results of the first round of testing, the research team estimates that approximately 4.1% of the county's adult population has an antibody to the virus. Adjusting this estimate for the statistical margin of error implies about 2.8% to 5.6% of the county's adult population has an antibody to the virus, which translates to approximately 221,000 to 442,000 adults in the county who have been infected. That estimate is 28 to 55 times higher than the 7,994 confirmed cases of COVID-19 reported to that county at the time of the study in early April. There you have it. This is the study that Roberts is talking about. The USC is what they're saying here. And remember, this is a great university with great scientists. They're not trying to pull off a hoax. They're saying, look, we have done a study, a randomized study, and when we study the population, it looks like, yes, we're seeing those we've tested, but that looks like it's somewhere between, what was it, 28? What was the number there? 28 to 55 times more. That we're missing the number, and as that number, I've told you for weeks, goes up, the death rate goes down. But they're not alone. Stanford has done a similar study. This is Stanford. LA County antibody tests suggest that coronavirus infections vastly exceed official counts. Study estimates a more than 50-fold increase in coronavirus infections compared to official cases. But experts have raised concerns about the reliability of antibody kits. I mean, this is part of the conversation. And then here is the actual, and remember, if you're seeing it on MedRex, I want to make this point clear right now. All of these studies are under peer review. They're not published yet. These are the findings that are coming out from these universities. They're preprints, so MedRex lets people look at the first draft of these studies. So let me make that clear. We're going to still need to see these under peer review, but look at how multiple institutions, all on their own, are coming to such similar conclusions. Remember, this isn't Neil Ferguson all by himself in the UK and the world is following. These are people and institutions on their own challenging it. All right, let's look at next at what it had to say. We conclude that based on seroprevalence sampling of a large regional population, the prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 antibodies in Santa Clara County was between 2.49% and 4.16% by early April. While this prevalence may be far smaller than the theoretical final size of the epidemic, it suggests that the number of infections is 50 to 85-fold larger than the number of cases currently detected in Santa Clara County. So they're even going higher. Their numbers are saying 50 to 80 times. At the time of this study, did I already read this? Santa Clara County had the largest number of confirmed cases of any county in Northern California, 1,094. The county also had several of the earliest known cases of COVID-19 in the state, including one of the first presumed cases of community-acquired disease, making an especially appropriate location to test a population-level sample for the presence of active and past infections. We can use our prevalence estimates to approximate the infection fatality rate from COVID-19 in Santa Clara County as of April 10, 2020. 50 people have died of COVID-19 in the county, with an average increase of 6% daily in the number of deaths. If our estimates of 48,000 to 81,000 infections represent the cumulative total on April 1st, and we project deaths to April 22nd, a 3-week lag from time of infection to death, we estimate about 100 deaths in the county. 100 deaths out of 48,000 to 81,000 infections corresponds to an infection fatality rate of 0.12 to 0.2%. Very, very similar. Two great universities with different scientific bodies doing different testing coming to the same conclusion. And then outside of the university system, we have a private group that decided to do some studies. This is, let me look. Oh, here we go. This is the severe underestimation of COVID-19 case numbers, effect of epidemic growth, and test restrictions. This is by Peter Richterich from Codon Code Corporation. I think they're involved in making tests and kits and things like that. But DNA sequencing. They're involved in DNA sequencing. So look at what they had to say in their article. While we use a computer model to illustrate our findings and get numerical estimates, it should be noted that the results are not specific to the model employed. Very similar results can be obtained by using observed daily growth rates of an epidemic and existing knowledge about the delay between infection and the onset of symptoms that meet the existing test criteria. The actual numbers may vary slightly, but the overall conclusions will remain the same. What was the conclusion? This study shows that the number of confirmed cases understates actual infections during the rapid growth phase of a COVID-19 epidemic by a factor of as much as 50 to 100 times. Three totally different entities now approaching this using computer models, real data, sampling sizes, all coming into this very, very similar result. 25 to 50 times, 50 to 80 times, 50 to 100 times the amount of people have been infected in America, which means our death rate has gone down. Let me show you how this works since you may be confused. If you're joining us, we geek out on data here on the High Wire. I'm not just going to read you a bunch of headlines. Let me show you how the math works. All right, let's go to the whiteboard. Here we have it. Now, when I look at the numbers and the way that they should be, we have to look at the infected, correct? So here's what we know in America right now, that the number of infected, when we checked before this show started, we were at, so let me just put here, infected, 865,979, okay? So this is the number we're going with. And what they're saying is, this is who we've actually tested. This is who we know has it. But what we're hearing from all these institutions is 25 to 50 times more people have it, 50 to 100 times, 50 to 80 times. So let's do the math since the median number is sort of in that 50 zone. Let me show you how this math works. We're going to go 865,979 times 50, okay? That means that the actual number, very well, of people infected in America right now could be as high as 43,298,950 people. This is using 50 times, which all three of the studies had that number involved. Now let's go at the current deaths in America. Now this is a really hard number. I mean, we'll talk later about whether or not it's bloated, but it's a real number. We're not guessing at it anyway. We don't have test samples. This is what's been reported. We have a report that the deaths in America total is 48,808 total deaths now in America. So how do we find out what the death rate is? Well, here's how we do that. We take 43,298,950 and we divide it into 48,808. And what is the number we get when we do that? It comes out to 0.00112. Okay? That's the number. Now remember, if you're going to state it as a percentage point, then you wipe out these two zeros and you write it like this. The death rate appears to be 0.11%. Okay? Less than 1. All right. In fact, 0.1% is what we have there. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and let's take the lowest number, since everyone's going to say, well, you dramatically used 50. One of the studies said 25. Okay, let me do 25 really quickly for you. Let's once again take 865,979 times 25, which equals 21,649,475. We take that 21,649,475, we divide it into 48,808, and the number we get is 0.00225, meaning, in this case, wipe out both zeros, you're at a 0.2%, 0.22%. So you're either at 0.1 or 0.2, 1/10 of 1% or 1/20th of 1%. That's where we're at. Those are the facts. Why does this matter? This matters because that's exactly where the flu is at. We've reported over and over again. Flu in an average season is 0.13. It's at 0.13. There you have it. The death rate from seasonal flu is typically, they all say 0.1%, is 0.13. And it can go, in this case, 0.22. We've had flu seasons that went up to 0.5% that were really bad a few years ago. But still, what are we doing here? I mentioned that this was going to be the discussion. There you have it. We're used to 12,000 to 61,000 deaths from the flu in all, 2018. It was about 58,000. John Roberts is pointing that out. Look, it looks just like an average flu season. Deborah Birx doesn't want to answer this. And this is what I've been warning you about for weeks. 5 weeks ago, I said the question has to be, what is the death rate that warrants a quarantine? And if we're under it, when will we open the quarantine? Let me remind you what I said. This is 5 weeks ago, early March. Number one, in the United States of America where I live, and every one of you that is watching this around the world should ask this of your own government officials and your state officials. But what we need to ask is, what is the death rate that warrants quarantining a population and stopping them from being able to work and go on with ordinary life? We have never done it before for the flu, which is said to have a death rate of about 0.13%. And then question number two, once we know what that rate is and we know what that number is, if once our testing does come online and the models start to show us all around the world in our own testing of all the people showing the mild cases and the asymptomatic cases, and we watch this death rate dropping down as we know it naturally will, once it drops below that threshold that our governments have set, will we remove this quarantine and say, false alarm, everybody, sorry. We took obvious precautions which were necessary, but now that we've recognized that this death rate is well below a threshold that we have set, we are going back to our normal lives. No one asked that question. We never got a reporter to say, at what level do we quarantine? If flu is at 0.13%, certainly, and we've had, flus that are up to 0.5%, when we think of, other things, swine flu, things like that, SARS, all these things, we never locked down. We never used draconian measures before. But no one ever asked this question, and that's why I said this was going to be a problem. When the number starts coming down, you have to be able to say, hey, that's it, open it up, it's over. It has the same death rate. Remember, this isn't total death. This isn't total deaths. They're saying deaths based on infection rate. It's a percentage. We are right at flu, 0.1 to 0.2%. Yet Deborah Birx won't answer the question, and I warned you about this. I've never had a problem with quarantine. I've never said we shouldn't lock down in case there's a deadly disease. But our scientists and those that lead this nation are supposed to study the science, and once the data starts coming in and they recognize, oh, snap, it is just the flu. All right, we're going to have some egg on our faces. We're going to have to go out and say it to the public, but hopefully they'll understand. Instead, they're doubling and tripling down and changing the conversation about testing healthy people who aren't having symptoms. It's crazy. Luckily, though, I don't think we're alone. You are not going, the cat's out of the bag, right? The cat's out of the bag. Universities across the country are getting to the truth. And we now have a sitting senator inside of the Senate, Rand Paul, making a very, very appropriate statement because he recognizes that the cat is out of the bag, too. Here's what he had to say.
The senator from Kentucky.
No amount of money, not all the money in China, will save us from ourselves. Our only hope of rescuing this great country is to reopen the economy. If you print up billions of dollars and give it to people, they are unlikely to spend it until you end the quarantine. The good news, though, is that the scientific community finally has facts instead of conjecture. The models that used 3.4% mortality were fortunately very wrong. Random samples now of thousands of people have now been tested for antibodies or immunity to coronavirus. 2 large randomized studies in California show similar results. The number of people who have already developed antibodies to the coronavirus is 25 to 50 times higher than the number that is being reported as infected. This is great news. This study means that the mortality rate may well be 25 to 50 times less deadly than previously thought. The virus is still dangerous, and we shouldn't ignore the risks, but we should put those risks in perspective. These randomized tests indicate that instead of a 3.4% mortality, that the rate could be as much as only 0.1% or 0.2%. We now have solid scientific evidence from randomized studies that we can manage this disease without continuing the draconian lockdown of the economy. The question before us isn't do nothing or print endless amounts of bailout cash. The debate should now include the one choice that will get our economy growing again, reopening American commerce. So today I rise in opposition to spending $500 billion more. The virus bailouts have already cost over $2 trillion. Our annual deficit this year will approach $4 trillion. We can't continue on this course. No amount of bailout dollars will stimulate an economy that is being strangled by quarantine. It is not a lack of money that plagues us, but a lack of commerce. This economic calamity only resolves when we begin to reopen the economy. Opening the economy will require Americans to rise above partisanship, to understand that deaths from infectious disease will continue, but that we cannot indefinitely quarantine.
I mean, if you're going to get out of a Groundhog Day, isn't this enough information? Multiple studies, senators realizing it, reporters being caught on microphones saying, hey, look, it just looks like the flu. I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry for those of you out there that really bought into this and wanted to trust Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx, and you hung in there as every one of their models kept collapsing and collapsing. They apologized, it's down. And still in this last report, she's still saying, we just don't have the data. Our theory is, why are you stuck on theories now? And now I want you to think about something that's even more drastic. When we're looking at the total death numbers, right? But what if those numbers are bloated? With bloated numbers right now, if they're bloated, we're still only at the flu. They could be well less. In fact, Donald Trump called out New York on exactly this. He was a little pissed off. This was in the New York Post. Trump accuses NYC of padding its coronavirus death toll. It goes on to talk about they added 3,700 victims who died of apparent coronavirus symptoms but were never tested. Maybe it's some of those people that were having heart attacks at home that were too afraid to go into the hospital because they had a heart problem and normally would have been in there dealing with their heart issue in the hospital. They died at home because they were told to. Or maybe they died and the ambulance didn't come and revitalize them. But instead of saying, oops, sorry we said do not resuscitate, sorry we're using these crazy draconian measures, and we're saying the only thing that's open in our hospitals is the ER, now we're going to use those numbers and bolster our coronavirus death rate to make it look worse? That's not the only place it's being done. We've been reporting on this, and you know it. We talked about the fact that several weeks ago they finally had the COVID-19 code for death, and we watched the numbers shoot up. And we talked about how this is the CDC basically telling people, go ahead and bloat those numbers, because we know that they're mostly all suffering from secondary life-threatening illnesses. And this was what went on to say. It is important to emphasize that coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 should be reported on the death certificate for all decedents where the disease caused or is assumed to have caused or contributed to the death. It goes on. This is a question. If you're not understanding what we're saying, wink, wink, doctor, here's what you need to know. What happens if the terms reported on the death certificate indicate uncertainty, meaning I'm uncertain? What should I do then? If the death certificate reports terms such as probable COVID-19 or likely COVID-19, these terms would be assigned the new ICD code, meaning use the code that they did die of COVID-19. And in case you're worried, we're going to check up on you. Let us just make it clear. It is not likely that NCHS will follow up on these cases. Well, there you have it. There you have it. We knew they were going to bloat it. We've been reporting on this, but we're not all alone on this discussion. In fact, now that we have Rand Paul standing on the Senate floor, he's a doctor. And by the way, he suffered coronavirus and survived it himself. I want to bring on a senator and a doctor right now who's been talking a lot about this. Scott Jensen joins me right now. Scott, I've seen you on Fox News. I've seen you all over. You're a doctor. You're also involved in politics. You know, we reported several weeks ago that it looks very much like the CDC is asking doctors and coroners or whoever fills out these forms to bloat the numbers. Go ahead and take it, make it all COVID-19. If I got that wrong, you're a doctor. What was your experience when you saw this recommendation by the CDC on the death certificates?
Well, that was actually April 3rd, Adele, and I had never seen something like that before. All of a sudden, I read this document from the Department of Health, and it said, go ahead and diagnose COVID-19. It didn't say put down probable. It said, go ahead and put COVID. You just showed it on your screen before. And so then I went to the CDC document, and that flies completely in the face of the manual that CDC puts out as to how death certificates should be filled out. In the manual, it talks about specificity and precision. And all of a sudden, we're being told, well, if it's reasonable, if it's likely, if it's probable, or it's presumptive, go ahead and put that down. That was what caused me to raise this up the flagpole, if you will, and say, hey, I've never been coached or told before that this is what I need to do. And so I checked with 50 to 75 physicians in Minnesota, and none of them could remember it either. We didn't have that happen in 2018 when we had 60 to 80,000 deaths from influenza. If I diagnosed pneumonia and I put that on the death certificate, nobody was telling me to put influenza on it as well if I happened to be in the middle of a flu epidemic. If I didn't test for it, if I didn't have an interest in testing for it, then I certainly shouldn't be putting it on the death certificate.
Wow. And so when you think about it, when you think about what's happening, can we then assume, you know, and look, I want to be clear. Doctors are good people. They mean well. They also really, you know, I think that one of the things that we've learned, you know, on the high wire is they really want to do what the CDC tells them to do. The CDC writes the Bible in many ways of how they move forward, what they're supposed to do. So in this case, you have doctors doing what they're being told to do. It also helps, I think, bring funding into the hospital, I would think, you know, but do you think that there's a real likelihood that these death rates, if we really went back, I know that Italy had said that 99% of the deaths in Italy had comorbidities, other life-threatening illnesses, and when their health department went back through, they said you should really look at it as though only 12% of death certificates have shown a direct causality from coronavirus. Do you feel like that might be an accurate way how we should be looking at the overall death numbers right now?
Absolutely. Typically, death certificates are filled out based on causation. And now we're simply saying, well, you can just correlate it to what happens to be going around. I mean, we never do things like that. So I think that undermines the public trust. And then if you start looking at the actual numbers of how dollars come into this. When someone adds a diagnosis to a death certificate or a hospital discharge summary, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything wrong. I've been in hospitals for 35 years, and I've had administrative, clerical type of coding people come alongside of me and say, Dr. Jensen, I noticed that you discharged this patient with heart failure and pneumonia. And I say, yeah, that's right. That's what they had. And they'll say, well, but they also had a low potassium. And I say, yeah, but the low potassium really didn't have a lot to do with what we did during the hospitalization. But the coding person would say, but they did have it. So if we put that diagnosis down, we might get paid more. And it's true. And the fact of the matter was they had low potassium. So I'll add that diagnosis. That oftentimes matters. We've been told by hospitals for Medicare patients, it's way better for us to put down dehydration as the primary diagnosis and diarrhea as the second, because if you flip it, you get paid less. So there's no question, hospital administrators will coach us. And that's when I put some information out as to how much do you get paid for a standard pneumonia if it's a Medicare patient, how much do you get paid for if it's COVID-19, how much do you get paid if it's COVID-19 with a ventilator.
What are those numbers?
These things matter.
What are those
Well, I
numbers?
actually sent them over to you. But if a typical garden variety pneumonia without complications for a Medicare patient will be about $5,000. If you have COVID-19 pneumonia, it's about $13,000.
Wow.
And if you use a ventilator, it's $39,000. And these numbers come straight from CMS. Right there they are.
Wow, look at that. Wow, that's fascinating. You know, you bring up the ventilators. You know, I was just reporting that Stat News is now saying that the NIH has put out new guidelines trying to back people away from ventilators. Much of this appears, and we talked about this with Jeffrey Jackson, we've been hearing about incredibly high death rates from ventilators. Many people remember Kyle Seidel coming forward in New York saying, I mean, really like screaming from a mountaintop, like Paul Revere saying, I don't know what this is, but it does not appear to be, the ARDS, as we know it, acute respiratory distress syndrome. These people don't have liquid in their lungs. They're talking to me. They're coherent, and I'm putting them in a coma and putting a ventilator down their throat. This video came out just over the last couple of days. We weren't able to vet who this is, but he's saying something similar. So just so people get an idea, I want to ask you if this is true. But first, I don't know if you saw this video. Take a look at this.
I am a respiratory therapist. Been doing this for 21 years. I've been kind of all over the place doing this. I wanted to show you our equipment room here. So we want to talk about COVID-19. First thing I want to say is does it look like there's a ventilator shortage? There's not. Okay, let's talk about ventilators and why there would be a shortage of ventilators. Well, this is non-invasive ventilation here, CPAP or BiPAP. This is a mask that gets strapped on you, and we can help you breathe with that. We're not allowed to use those, okay? We're finally opening up to where we can use them a little bit, but for the most part, since COVID came out, they said absolutely not. That's going to cause the virus to spread all over the place by spraying aerosols everywhere, and so we can't use it. You have to let the patient crash and go straight to a ventilator, okay? Traditionally, that's not the way we would treat a patient. We also have aerosolized medications, bronchodilators. We're not allowed to use those either. So everything that we would traditionally do, we're not allowed to do.
Now, I found this video interesting because I've had a lot of anonymous reports from doctors that didn't want to speak out, not quite as brave as yourself, and saying exactly this, that we were not using oxygen because there was a concern that it would aerosolize. Therefore, we were just letting these people get to the point where they're starved of oxygen and then just moving straight into a ventilator. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and this really wasn't what you came on for, but since you're involved in this, is there accuracy to this discussion? And is this, when we see new guidelines from the NIH, are they now saying, let's use those other oxygen techniques versus, waiting for a ventilator? Is there any truth to this story from your perspective?
Well, this story was problematic for me, and I had seen the video because he didn't identify who he was. Right. I think part of what it indicates is that initially our understanding of this disease was overly simplistic. We initially thought it was mucus plugs, and then we thought it was alveolar damage. And then we started saying, well, gee, if we just jack up the pressure, we don't seem to be helping these people. Instead of 1 out of 3 people dying on a ventilator, we're having 2 out of 3 people dying. So I think what we've learned is that COVID-19 disease is a multi-system encroachment. I mean, we're seeing people with blood in their urine. We're seeing impact on liver. So we've really had to take a step back. And I think we're trying to learn as fast as we can. But I think that your basic question is this ventilator shortage the crisis that we had been led to believe? For a variety of reasons, one of them being that ventilators may not be as useful as we thought. I think that we're going to, at the end of this corona epidemic, when we get to the other side, we're going to see unpacked ventilators sitting on pallets, because we, in Minnesota, for every ventilator being used, we probably have 5 to 10 waiting on the sidelines.
Wow.
And I think that this is a huge issue. And I think what we did is we hit the panic button. But you know, Dale, if I could be so bold, I would just like to say one of the things I'm really concerned about is moving the goalposts. Initially, we were told, stay with us, build the public trust, social distancing, and we're going to have to lock you down because we really need to stop this transmission. The initial rationale was we need to flatten the curve, we need to build up our preparation so we don't overwhelm our hospital facilities. Right now, most hospitals, everyone virtually in Minnesota, they're dying on the vine. Their occupancy rates are 25%. We're losing $31 million a day in hospital. We have flattened the curve. We have pushed the peak down. We have adequate hospital capabilities now. If we've done the things that we wanted to do, then why would we continue to lock down? There's no reason to. You've already said very persuasively that wherever we end up on the fatality rate here, it's going to be somewhere between 0.1 and 0.4. It's not going to be anywhere near the 30% that MERS was in 2013. It's not going to be the 10% that SARS might have been in 2003. It's not going to be the 5 to 10% in 1918. This is going to be somewhere 1 out of 200 people, 1 out of 1,000, somewhere in there. So we've got to revitalize America, because when it comes to mind, body, and spirit, the mind and the spirit are being crushed, and we're focusing entirely on the body and the virus. And we know that 40 to 50% of the people don't even know they have the disease. We know that. And another 40 to 50% are going to skate through it. So folks, let's press the chill button. We're okay. Let's get back to work.
So let me ask you this. I mean, you're saying, you know, these numbers 0.1, 0.4, you know, somewhere in that range. You're also, you know, at the same time saying that the numbers we're looking at that are giving us that sense could very well be bloated. But I want to ask you one more question, because we are seeing, as I think you've, you know, clearly, and I know you have to be careful about this, and hospitals are doing the best they can, and everyone's learning what they can. And we can look back in hindsight and say, did the NIH move fast enough? Did we have an investigation into what were the actual symptoms? Could we have, you know, learned faster? But it does seem clear that ventilating everybody on this probably did raise the death rate. And my question to you is, as we're seeing, you know, success with multiple approaches, from hydroxychloroquine to, you know, different sort of blood products that are bringing in antibodies, and then, of course, if we start moving into oxygen and moving away from ventilators, could we assume that had this all happened over again, or if they're talking about maybe perhaps a relapse in the fall where, you know, coronavirus comes back, could we assume that this death rate will be even lower, not just because of the bloated numbers, because we'll actually treat it better the next time around?
I think that's an excellent point. I think you're absolutely right. The reason that in the year 1900, one of the leading causes of death was influenza/pneumonia was because we didn't have antibiotics. So in 1918, it was devastating. 50 million people dying. We're in that same situation. It's just not an antibody. Now we're trying to understand the mechanism of disease, and we've got brilliant medical centers, physicians working hard to understand this. And you give us another month and we're going to be a lot smarter than we are today. We've already seen that with the ventilators. Whether it ends up being hydroxychloroquine, whether it ends up being convalescent plasma, whether it ends up being some of our antiviral agents, we're working desperately hard. And even the development of a vaccine, which may or may not be helpful, that's going to be, that's already being fast tracked. So come October, I have every confidence.
Nope. Did we lose you, Scott? All right, well, I think we've just lost Scott Jensen, but, oh, here we go, very quickly.
Yes, we could see that. When we had Jerry Ford getting his vaccine on TV or on the newspapers, we end up having to stop that program because of the high incidence of Guillain-Barré. So we need to not put all of our hopes on a vaccine. We need to also let our own immune systems build a herd immunity. If we can get to 60, 70% of the population, we've accomplished a lot, and that's where we're heading.
That's all fantastic news. Some of it broke up, but I get the sense of it. What you're saying is, you know, we've got to develop antibodies ourselves. That's what we're seeing. We have a large number already there. Let's continue this journey. Let's take care of those that are at risk, right? This very small percentage that clearly are having an acute issue. Let's make sure that they're protected while the rest of us go back to work. Most of us not going to have symptoms, for others very mild. And this idea of leaning on a vaccine somewhere in the future, we have seen problems with that before. And it looks like we have a way out of this, that the numbers are going to stay low in around the flu. And so my last question to you, you are also a politician. You're a state representative. And, you know, people are watching this show. There's a lot of people trying to wake up their friends and say, look, the studies are showing it. We can handle this. We can get out. We know how to deal with it now. We're getting better and better at it. What should someone do with their politics to say, I want to go back to my job. I'm not afraid of something that has a death rate of 0.1 to 0.2 or 3%. That's what the studies are showing. What is it we need to do as a people to end Groundhog Day here? To not have to wake up tomorrow morning to the same song on our alarm clock and this really droll, you know, depressing time where we're watching our jobs just pour down the drain. What do we need to do to get our government to wake up here?
That's a great question, and I wish I could be more optimistic. The problem is so many states have been functioning on executive orders from the governor. So even though we have perhaps 201 legislators, we're not having 201 decision makers. We're having a governor and his team. So we need to focus our efforts at the governor and let that governor know. And in Minnesota, I think Governor Walz has gotten a lot of input, a lot of feedback, and we just need to double down and redouble our efforts and get as much input to him and say, we want to get back to work. Because quite frankly, I feel impotent myself. I don't feel like I'm being given the opportunity to really help influence our policy. I feel like I'm standing on the sidelines watching just as much as you are, and it's frustrating as all get out.
It really is. And so let me ask you this. I mean, I keep thinking this is the last question, but you are such a great guest because you're on all sides of this. You know, are the governors looking at the USC study? Are they looking at the Stanford study? Did they recognize that the imperial model crashed? Or is there just some sort of like drone clone army being put out by this tiny group of scientists that don't seem to want to accept the reality that this just isn't as deadly? Are they getting a broad range of information around them? Are they looking at all these things?
That's a great question. I think they're getting a glimpse of it, but I think what happens to elected leaders so readily, and I mean, I've only been in the Senate 4 years, but I've certainly watched us get captured in an echo chamber. And we have people around us that they say what we want to hear. And the idea of being skeptical, that's one of the most powerful things we can do in America is engage fully. And you've said that many times. We need Americans to feel empowered and know that they don't have to participate in groupthink. Groupthink is a dangerous step. I've said this before. It was groupthink that allowed nearly 1,000 people in 1978 to follow Jimmy Jones in drinking some cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. We don't want to be about that. That's not America's history. It's not our heritage. We need to be empowered, and that's partly why I've spoken up. I am a skeptic. Do I appreciate Governor Walz's efforts? Absolutely. But do I feel like I've been given 1/67th of the Senate's fractional impact on what we're doing? Absolutely not. I feel frustrated. I feel impotent. And I get phone calls from patients who say, I've got a breast lump, and to me, this isn't an elective surgery. I want this thing removed, and I don't feel better because someone says it's not likely to be a breast cancer, and even if it is, it's probably slow growing. I want it out yesterday, and I've had to wait 2 months. America, wake up. This is your country.
Thank you so much for all of that great information. Senator Dr. Scott Jensen, thank you for taking the time and joining us. Really, really important to hear from you. Thank you. Well, as he so clearly said, You know, America, we're designed to be skeptical. That is what we're supposed to be. That is what our founding fathers dreamed about. A people empowered to stand up for what was right, using data, able to read, able to vote, able to make a difference. And that's what we saw all around the country last week as people were protesting in Michigan, in Ohio, in North Carolina. It's been going on. People have been stepping out. Lots of questions. We were even hearing that Facebook doesn't want to allow these videos out as they're taking place. But that didn't stop people all across this country. They didn't stop them here in Texas. There was a rally here in Texas over the weekend. Obviously, California had a huge turnout in Sacramento. Was that just yesterday or the day before? Monday, Sacramento, everyone joining there. But in Texas, we had rallies going on over several days. I went out on Saturday. I wanted to get a feel for why are people there? What's going on? What are they really protesting? What do they feel? Here's a taste of some of the people I met at the rally in Austin, Texas. What do you do for a living?
I'm a chiropractor.
I'm a doula.
I work with Texas Right to Know.
Cindy, what do you do for a living?
I am a nursing professor.
What brings a nursing professor to a rally at the Capitol when there's a coronavirus running around?
Well, I've done a lot of research. I definitely believe that more people have had the coronavirus than we will ever know.
Do you think the coronavirus is dangerous? What's your theory on it?
No, I'm not worried about the coronavirus. There's trillions of viruses around us. I think it's dangerous if you have a compromised immune system. And I think it's dangerous if you're elderly, but I think any cold or any flu or anything will be dangerous if you already have a comorbidity issue. All this social distancing, it's not healthy for us, it's not healthy for our children.
The center of this rally is getting back to work. When you can say that a liquor store is deemed essential, but companies that are selling beneficial products for a multitude of different issues going on are not deemed essential. These are shutting down small businesses. This is unprecedented. We've never seen the government be able to deem something essential. This is not hurting Costco. This isn't hurting Walmart. But if the goal really is about public health, provide products that benefit people and don't centralize everyone in one spot.
So what happens to, pregnant women that were working with a doula all the way up into their pregnancy? What's happening there?
We can support them virtually, and if I have home births, I can attend those, which I prefer anyways. But it's really not about me either. I have friends who are in the service industry, massage therapists, servers, bartenders, and they're out of work for over a month now. And they need to get back to work to support themselves and their families.
The reason I'm here and what I think this is really about is grabbing our freedoms. I feel like there's a bigger agenda at play here, and that it's not about a virus, because there are over 300,000 viruses, I think, or more in the world. So are we going to always be in fear? Are we going to always wear masks? There's been hardly anyone die compared to, like the flu or other viruses.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to sound harsh, it's just that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children and other people that are going to die if we don't open the world back up.
Why are you at the Capitol during coronavirus, not wearing a mask?
Yeah, so I had arranged a protest on Thursday to just come and fight for our First Amendment, and then Greg Abbott came out with his statement yesterday, and he was saying that basically he wasn't going to let any of us out until there was a vaccine. So I'm like, okay, now it's a vaccine issue.
This is all because of a vaccine mandate. They want the COVID vaccine. They want to keep us at social distancing until the vaccine comes out. Our governor just said that yesterday.
I'm worried about the coronavirus vaccine. If they mandate it, will the kids be able to go back to school? So, if we don't stand up for our kids, who will? So I'm here.
Right now, with all of this big push for the vaccine is not a treatment. It's a quote.
Well, certainly since it does not exist on this planet as we know it right now, it is not an existing treatment, so it seems a bit futile. But yeah.
There are good options that exist out there to treat this. We need good treatment options. We need to press that out, and I really ask that everyone continue to press on their state officials and also nationally.
Artificial immunity will never take the place of our God-given natural immunity. So I just taught a class on immunity.
My understanding of most nurses is the opposite is the belief system.
They're starting to wake up. It's just something they've been told. They've been conditioned
to believe that, and I'm 62. I've never had a flu shot.
That's obviously what the bigger picture is they want a vaccine, they want to mandate that. And I believe they're using this as like a false flag event to do that.
If I have antibodies, does that mean I'm infected or does that mean I'm immune? Which is it? They're testing for genetic material, genetic sequencing. You know, how is that proof positive that I'm a danger to be close to you or someone else? And are we going to let the government tell us who's sick and who's not? You know, if I'm perfectly healthy and they're going to say I'm asymptomatic, are they going to rip me away from my family, my children away?
Or worse, what if your kid is positive and you aren't? I mean, that's the thing I think about. Are they going to take your child out of your house? What do you think is going to come of all this?
I think the population's waking up. I think there's a war going on, both on the physical level and on the spiritual level. And people all over, you can see by the size of this rally that was just spontaneously erupted within the last 24 hours, how many people are awake to the scams that are going on and have been going on in our country for decades.
I believed what we were being told. I'm like, just listen to the news, like they'll tell you the truth. But the older I got, the more I realized they're lying to you. People aren't critically thinking, and you have to think for yourselves and not just read the title of a, mainstream media post.
We were warned about this stuff from Eisenhower and Kennedy, and now it's manifesting.
Are we going to let the government tell us what we can wear on our bodies? Are we going to let them tell us what time to go home, that we can only go out of our home once a day to jog? That is pushing too far on my rights to walk about freely and move freely in my own country.
I think every single Texan should be here today.
That was just a taste of some of the people that we met there in Austin. I want to take this opportunity to really express to you, if you are watching The High Wire, you have been watching The High Wire, we're the only network, we're the only ones that have been giving you the data from day one. We predicted all of this. How did we get it right? Because we have hired scientists and doctors and real mathematicians around the world, not just on our team here, but around the world bringing that data. And I'm going to be honest with you, we are spending a fortune. Nothing like what NBC and Fox and those get from the pharmaceutical institutions, but for a bunch of people, like a handful of people here in Austin, Texas, that have some regular SLR cameras to bring you this show, we are standing with you. We're the only network and news source that is bringing you the truth and is going out and standing with you in these rallies. I have to tell you, I got calls from everybody, from NBC, from Daily Beast, all saying, well, I mean, as a reporter, are you actually supporting these rallies? You know what? Yes. Yes, I support the people of the United States of America standing up for their rights. That's what we believe in here on The High Wire, and I really do need your help. So many of you have been donating to make all this possible so we could do this. But we are doing reports in Sweden now, so you can see what's going there. We are going out to rallies. We're getting people to, bring their information in. All of this. And imagine what we could do if we could get more funding. I'm asking you right now, if you enjoy what you're hearing and you recognize that The High Wire is the only one going to be standing with you and fighting to open up our jobs here in America, if that matters to you, then please help be a part of this voice. This is your voice. The High Wire is your voice. So just support us. We're asking for $20 for 2020. Bring that pure, perfect 2020 vision into action in America when we need it most by giving us $20 a month. You've paid for your Netflix, and that's all you've been able to watch down in your basement as you've been locked away. Help us bring this information. This fight is not over. It's only beginning. You now know that this is just like a flu. You now recognize that the United States of America and the world have made a tragic error. This is a calamity. Who's going to get us out? Well, we're going to need voices, and you're going to need The High Wire. And in order to do that, I want you to join us. I want you to feel how good it feels to watch this show every week, to watch the data come in and say, you know what? I made that happen. Not Sanofi Aventis, not Pampers, not Johnson & Johnson. I made that happen. You can make that happen by helping us. And if you don't have $20 right now, I understand. Even 50 cents, $1 a month. Or for those of you that can make up for those others that want to be a part of it but can't give as much, if you can give $100 or $1,000, it makes a difference. And it's going to make it possible for us to get bigger and bigger guests in here and be able to travel further and further for the truth. We're all in this together. Thank you for being a part of this. And of course, we are starting to see our effect. We're starting to see that the information we've been sharing, I think there are other networks that are watching. I hope that Donald Trump has somebody watching the high wire, because it doesn't seem like anyone on his team wants to admit that they've made a mistake, that this perhaps was just an economic calamity. And I want to say there is a reporter out there. Britt Hume has been at this since I was a kid. I've seen him for years and years and years, reporting on all of the different changing tides in America and what it represents. He appeared on Fox just the other day and was asked what he thought about this issue. Remember, we have Rand Paul. We have reporters now understanding the truth inside of the White House briefing room. We have universities all over the country. And now one of our leading reporters that has been there from the beginning, I think, puts it together so perfectly. Listen to how Britt Hume described this week.
Hey, Britt, good to have you with us. What do you make about the ongoing conversation now about reopening versus staying put?
I think it's time to consider the possibility, Shannon, that this lockdown, as opposed to the more moderate mitigation efforts, that this lockdown is a colossal public policy calamity, that the damage to the economy, to businesses, I see, businesses are closing, many may not reopen, those jobs will be lost, those businesses will be lost, those incomes will be lost, plus the effect on children who don't have their normal life, they don't have school, they can't play with their friends, even outdoors. All these things are accumulating. They're not going to get better, Shannon. They're going to get worse with time. And as I say, many of them, we may not recover from many of these losses for a very long time, if ever. And there is not, to my knowledge, really powerful evidence that imposing this lockdown, apart from over and above the other mitigation efforts, is making any real difference. I have my doubts that it's making any difference at all. We don't know everything there is to know about this disease, but we know a lot more than we did. And one thing that we seem to know pretty clearly is who is most vulnerable and who is least vulnerable. The evidence that children are vulnerable to this is very limited, if it exists at all. Most of the evidence points the other way. So that deals with the question of whether they should be able to go back to school with, the teachers and so on taking appropriate precautions. And the other thing is we know that the elderly are overwhelmingly more vulnerable than almost any other group. In fact, than any other group. And it seems to me that protecting the elderly and keeping them at home if necessary, and also those with respiratory problems, is something we could certainly continue to do while allowing everybody else to get on with their business.
Why do you think this is presented in so many forums as a binary choice? You either care about the health and medical side of this, or you care about the economy and that side of it. And there's a lot of finger pointing across that chasm.
Well, we live in a country which is divided along a great chasm of their politics. The people who, a lot of the people who want to see this continue as is, if you drill down in what they say and examine sort of who they are and what else they've said, it turns out that they're the people who most dislike Donald Trump. So that gives you some clue about this. But I also think this, Shannon, I think this is important, that I look at people like Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, for whom I have very high regard, and I think, these people got us out on this limb. The president listened to them. They were doing what they, to the best of their knowledge, that was the right thing to do. It was a major wager, so to speak, and a drastic step. It isn't easy for anybody, any human being in that situation to say, oh, whoops, sorry. Yeah, we kind of overstated this. The models were wrong. We paid too much attention to them for too long, and this isn't turning out to be as bad as we thought. That would be very, very hard for anybody to do. And I think, I don't question their good faith at all, but I think they may have made a very serious mistake here.
I would agree. I think they have made a very serious mistake. The news is trying to spin this. They're trying to polish this turd. But it is what it is. We've all got to accept it, and we've got to not allow this conversation. Now they're saying, oh, you don't want to protect those that are in harm's way. You want to make this about money. You want to make this about jobs. You want to make this about finance. That's not what this is about. This is about human lives. Well, you're right, it is. And you cannot allow the media to spin this any longer as though the lockdown does not claim life. And guess what? The UN has just come out with a report. This was in Reuters. This is really scary. UN warns economic downturn could kill hundreds of thousands of children in 2020. It goes on to say, but the UN report warned that economic hardship experienced by families as a result of the global economic downturn could result in hundreds of thousands of additional child deaths in 2020, reversing the last 2 to 3 years of progress in reducing infant mortality within a single year. You might just be thinking, oh, the United Nations said an estimated 42 million to 66 million children could fall into extreme poverty as a result of the coronavirus crisis this year, adding to the estimated 386 million children already in extreme poverty in 2019. You may think the UN is just talking about Africa, is just talking about India or places like that, but we're seeing in our own reports here in America, this has a death toll. It's getting dangerous. Here is what you've been seeing about poverty and the ability for people to feed themselves here in the United States of America.
The other painful reality from the pandemic, hunger.
The financial fallout from the pandemic crisis is triggering a hunger crisis.
With millions of Americans still waiting for those stimulus checks and 10% of Americans out of a job in 3 weeks, long lines for food becoming a new normal.
Families across the country are just trying to figure out how to put dinner on the table.
Lines are stretching for miles in state after state.
Food banks in disaster mode.
Thousands have been forced to wait for hours in long lines.
Many who have never had to line up for food donations before.
Thousands of people lined up for hours to get help from a food bank in Texas.
The San Antonio Food Bank faced a line of 10,000 cars in one day.
7,200 pounds of food was given away from the Chicago Food Depository, and it went fast.
Just so striking to see one woman waiting 18 hours to get food in the United States of America.
You would think you're back in the 1920s or 30s during the era of the Great Depression.
It's been heartbreaking to see the need go up so much.
I want to be clear to those people out there like Lady Gaga or Oprah Winfrey or Matthew McConaughey, who is voicing commercials or singing on stages saying, you're a hero, stay in your basement, stay locked down, we need to wait for a vaccine. That attitude is going to get hundreds of thousands of innocent children killed this year, according to UN numbers. Every decent mathematician and global economic advisor is saying there is going to be massive casualties way outside of what the flu had ever dreamt of. And that's what we are now talking about. It is in. We may have attacked Donald Trump months ago when he said this appears to just be a flu. Maybe he got lucky. Maybe he didn't. But whatever the case, now we are seeing reports all around the world. Sweden now in the downturn. No higher death rate, and they never locked anyone down. We have proof from USC, Stanford, private groups, all reporting the same thing. This has the death rate of a flu season. Are we going to go another day and get people killed, make more jobs be lost every single day? We wait now for Deborah Birx to get up the gumption and for Anthony Fauci to get up enough energy to apologize to us, which is really all they should do. Just come out and say, sorry, we made a mistake, and we do not. The only problem with a mistake is one you don't admit and you continue to make. They have pride. We all have pride. And I think we all have to be honest with each other right now. Whether or not you're someone that has been watching the high wire and has been understanding these numbers from the very beginning and having issues with how it just hasn't been adding up, but you still lock yourself down. Or if you're one of these people that keeps tuning in the mainstream media as they spin this and polish this and try and hold on to this ridiculous story, and you think you really hate Donald Trump, we need to all take the politics away from this. Facts are facts. Universities are coming to the conclusions. More and more science is showing us that the death rate is about 0.1 to 0.2 or 3%. It is clear that is not a reason to destroy another single inch of this economy. But here's what we have to do. We've got to wake up our friends. We all have to wake up. And it's going to be embarrassing, right? For those of us that were wearing the masks and the gloves and looked like Howard Hughes as we went out the door. For those of us that were taking pictures of our neighbors because we were told that's what we were supposed to do. We're going to have to all forgive each other. It was a panic. It was a mistake. The media drove us into it. Maybe everybody meant well, but it was a serious calamity. It was an accident. We have to forgive each other. We have to recognize that what happened in the quarantine stays in the quarantine. But let's be honest. This really does look like another average flu season, maybe a bad flu season, but destroying the economy of the world and certainly the nation we live in here, United States of America, but for those of you in Australia and Poland and the UK and all around the world that are coming to the same conclusion. Let's wake up. Let's send this information to our governors and our leaders and say it's time to open up. We forgive you. We forgive you for caring and making the mistake. We forgive you for overreacting. I forgive you for taking pictures of me when I was out walking with my dog. We were pushed to the limit. We were scared. But we are not scared any longer because we have the truth. The truth that the high wire has been invested in from the beginning. That you have been watching here and joining us with. The Informed Consent Action Network that makes all this possible. That network is you. Thank you for your donations. Thank you for your contribution. Now get out there. Tell your friends and family and representatives the truth. We forgive you. Now let's open up and be real heroes and get back to work. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. And thank you for being a Highwire Insider. Be sure to share this show with your friends on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Instagram. Because knowledge is power, power is freedom, and we need all we can get.